Angular 21 opens a new and huge chapter for Angular testing because blazing fast and powerful, Vitest becomes a default testing framework and finally replaces Jasmine and deprecated Karma. In this video, I will guide you through enabling Vitest for your currently existing Angular application. You will see how to configure Vitest different ways, including usage of the vitest.config file. You will learn how to run unit tests in browser mode and how to avoid other common pitfalls when you migrate from Jasmine and Karma. So let's get started right away and jump straight to the point. For this tutorial, I'm going to use a simple Angular project which I used for some of my previous videos where I showed the top mistakes developers do when writing unit tests for Angular components. And as you can see, the tests here, they're very simple and mostly they test component inputs and outputs. And here I use the Jasmine framework along with the Karma test runner. So let's see how we can migrate this everything to Vitest. The first thing we have to do here is to install all necessary npm dependencies. So for that, let's open the terminal and install Vitest itself as a dev dependency. And additionally, I have to install also GS-DOM library. This library will emulate the browser environment while tests are executed in Node.js environment. And now hit enter, and after some time we are ready to continue. After this step, we have to slightly modify and adjust our Angular JSON file. And for that, let's go and open it and find the architect target called test. Here inside this target, we have a builder that is currently responsible for starting the Karma runner, which eventually executes our unit tests. But now I don't want to run Karma, but I want to use Vitest instead. So it means that I have to replace the Karma builder here with the new one called Angular build unit tests. Once we have done that, most of the options here, they will be highlighted as irrelevant for this particular builder. So we can simply remove most of them. And this is because this executor is not responsible for building your components before executing unit tests for them. Instead, it relies on artifacts produced by the build architect target with the development configuration. But no worries, it is configurable and you can adjust it to your needs. You can do that by using the target option called build target, where you can define the project name if you have multiple projects in your workspace. Then followed by a colon goes the build target, and eventually you define the configuration. And this string you see right now, it is a default and verbose notation of it. And if you want, you can change the project or target name according to your needs, or if you need only change the configuration, then you can shorten this long string to this one and then define your test-specific configuration, just like that. But of course, if you need it. In my case, I'm fine with the default, so I can remove this piece of configuration completely. And this is pretty much it. So we can go and remove all the Karma related files and packages. And in my particular case, I don't have Karma config. So the only thing I have to do is to simply uninstall this batch of npm packages related to Karma. Now we can try to execute the test target in our terminal, and you can see my unit tests are successfully executed, this time by Vitest, and it happened without any additional adjustments or refactoring of my unit test code. why does it work so simple? Well, this is because the API of vitest is very similar to Jasmine. And in my particular case, it is actually identical because test suites, they are defined by the describe function in vitest as well. For the test itself, their function it can be used, and also vitest has hooks like before each, before all, and others. However, it is not completely identical. For example, in Jasmine, if you want to execute only one particular test suite or test case, you have to add a character f in front of the describe or it function. However, if you try to check your console right now, you will see an error that says that vitest cannot handle such a function. In vitest, to achieve the same behavior, you must use different API and employ the describe only method to achieve the same result. But it leads to another problem with the build, because for whatever reason, the property only doesn't exist for the describe function. And the reason why the build fails is the wrong typing definition inside the ts.config spec.json file. So if you have a look at the current spec.ts configuration, you will see that here we define Jasmine types that are, as I said, are very similar, but they are not identical compared to the ones from the vitest. And here we've got multiple ways to solve this issue. The first one would be replacing the current Jasmine types with the ones delivered with the vitest package. This will bring the proper typings for the vitest describe, before each, and other global functions. And once you save this change and restart your tests, you should see that now everything works again. However, using this approach, you might see errors in your code editor, which is quite annoying. This is because the code editor doesn't know that these specific spec.ts files rely on different TypeScript configuration, and by default it just takes the base TypeScript config that doesn't contain these vitest typings. To get rid of this annoying error in your code editor, you can use TypeScript references feature and add the following configuration to your base ts.config.json file, and the error should be resolved after that. But my recommendation would be avoid using those globals at all, and instead just explicitly import them from the vitest package. So just like that. And as you can see, it automatically solves my typings issues, and it means that I don't even need those vitest globals typings that I defined before. So here we go. And usage of ES6 imports is great and brings a lot of benefits actually, because you don't pollute your global scope with certain variables and functions. It is modern and reshakable syntax, and also it simplifies typing's resolution for code editors, as you could see it a moment ago. However, you might find it pretty annoying to refactor inputs in every file, but fortunately, Angular 21 provides an experimental migration schematic that can migrate some parts of your unit test syntax to vitest. And if you additionally add a flag at imports, it will add vitest globals as imports. So now you can see that the before each, expect, and other global functions, they are now imported from the vitest package, as well as my describe function, which for whatever reasons wasn't merged in one import, but again, it is still an experimental schematic, so issues might happen. Anyway, this means that from now on, I can also get rid of a bunch of npm dependencies, and namely, I can remove everything related to Jasmine, which is great. So now, since I migrated from global functions, I can disable them altogether to force consistency across all my unit test files. And vitest, by the way, has globals disabled by default, but Angular Builder overrides it to make your migration from Jasmine simpler and faster. Anyway, unfortunately, this is not something that you could do directly inside the unit test builder options, so it will require a usage of the vitest.config file. So let me show you how you can create and use it. So for that, you have to use the option called runner config, and here, autocomplete suggests a Boolean type, which is likely a bug and might mislead you, but actually it should be a string that points to a vitest configuration file that you obviously have to create in your project root or anywhere else where it makes sense to you, right? And there inside this file, you simply have to import the define config function from the vitest package and return the result of this function call as a default export. The exact API of this object is very rich and you can investigate it on your own if you want, but in my particular case, I need to configure my tests, so I use a corresponding key, and here I define that globals must be off. So from now on, functions like before each, expect, describe, etc., they will not be globally available and they must be explicitly imported from the vitest package. But of course, it is not something you must do. If you want to continue using global functions, it is also fine. Another configuration that is optional but definitely worth mentioning is the environment where your tests are executed. Because right now they run in Node.js with a browser environment simulated by the JS DOM package. And this is not bad. You can continue using this approach, especially if performance is a key factor to you. However, a simulated browser environment is not the same as the real browser, and the vitest team recommends running your tests also in a real browser environment if you want to have the highest level of confidence. To run your tests in browser, first of all, you have to install a new package called vitest browser playwright, which provides you with a browser engine where our tests will be eventually executed. And after that, you can go back to your AngularJSON file, and to the builder config, you have to add a new option called browsers. And there you can define a list of browser engines you want to use. It can be Chromium, it can be Firefox or WebKit. And by the way, alternatively, you can do the same configuration inside the vitest.config.ts file if you want to keep vitest.config as a source of truth for your configuration stuff. But anyway, if you save this current configuration and try to rerun your tests, this time a Chrome browser instance will be spun up and your tests or my tests, they will be executed in real browser as it happened with Karma before. And before we continue, I would like to quickly mention TestSprite, who is a sponsor of today's video. It might be a very interesting tool for those who try to adopt AI tools in their development workflow because it is a useful AI agent that tests, fixes, and validates your applications. They provide a dedicated MCP server which you can install into your AI tool like Cursor or Cloud Code and simply ask it to test your application with TestSprite. It will analyze your code base and at some point it will ask you to provide a product requirements document that describes what your application does. My application is very simple, so the corresponding PRD is quite simple too. But anyway, I can upload this and after that, Test Sprite will build a test plan based on the requirements I provided. Then it will create corresponding tests, execute them, and provide you with the final report, which you can see in your Test Sprite account or in the generated report locally. If you want to try Test Sprite yourself, you can find a link in the video description. Following it, you can create a free account and try it against your application. And if you want to continue, you can switch to the starter plan. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video until the end, and if you want to see more content about unit testing in Angular, I have a couple of other videos available for free on my YouTube channel, or you can check out my entire video course about unit testing in Angular. And if you find this particular video useful, please share it with your colleagues and friends. In such a way you help my channel to grow and you motivate me to create more such videos about Angular. So that's it for today. I wish you a productive week ahead, stay safe, and see you in the next video.